Hello, we are live. I'm Chad Pytel, and
I'm Stephanie Min.
together we are not the hosts of the Bike Shed, but Stephanie is joining me today. We are live from RubyConf, so thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Um, have we ever paired together before?
We've done one of these live streams together
Awesome. Yeah.
before. Yeah.
Okay. I thought that was the case. So welcome back.
Thank you.
What we're going to be working on today is building upon what we did last time, which was we have a lot of guides, handbook repo, the playbook, our entire blog, um, and we built a tool where we could ask a question to ChatGPT. And before sending that question to ChatGPT, we find the relevant documentation from our guide and send it along as context to ChatGPT. And then we get it to, using only the information provided, answer the following question and provide the URL where the answer can be found. And so we can go to Rails console and we can do things like this. What do I do if my computer is stolen? And what it's doing now is it's finding the documentation that's relevant to that. It bundled it up, sent it to ChatGPT as context, and it responded with this answer, which is the correct answer. And it gives the URL that you can find that full answer for.
Cool. I have a question already.
Yeah.
What is this repositories model?
The repositories model is it's a model that points at GitHub or a Git repo. So that model has logic for pulling down a Git repo and knows how to go through the tree of the Git repo.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So we every night run a rake task that pulls down all the Git repos and indexes them in Elasticsearch. So what's actually happening when we ask that question is it's going through and it's using Elasticsearch with the search class that we have in our app, and it's finding the relevant documents that contain information related to that question. And then it builds up the context. It's staying under the token count. So ChatGPT and all the LLMs have a certain limit to the amount of information that you can send along with them. That's why this general procedure of pulling out relevant information and only sending that as context is really common in, it has its own acronym. It's called RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. So it's like where you retrieve something and you use that to augment the generated answer.
Cool. And how are we scoping down the context that we're sending?
Elasticsearch basically did it. All we need to do, and this is why I was a little skeptical at first. A lot of people who do this end up introducing a specific database used for retrieval augmented generation. It's like a vector database or something like that. It turns out we were able to get really good results just by sending the full text of the question to Elasticsearch, because the way Elasticsearch does is it does a fuzzy search on the topic. So it's able to find the most relevant pages from any of our guides related to the question.
Cool. That's nice. And I suspect that that was all just already the existing functionality from our search. And
yes,
yeah,
exactly.
right?
We
Okay.
got that all for free. And like I was saying on the stream last time that one, we found this is true with clients as well. Like they might already have a search engine, but if you look online for how to do this kind of thing, it basically says get a vector database and load all your documents into it. Now, for this project and other projects, we found, oh, we already have a search engine that works perfectly fine.
Yeah.
And so that changes the scope of the project because I was able to do this in a few hours
Yeah.
and get something that works instead of having to spin up a whole nother database and put that in our infrastructure and that kind of thing. So I was really excited when that was the case. And it's been the case on at least one client project where we were able to use existing search infrastructure.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So was this repository model already part of the Elasticsearch functionality, or did you introduce it specifically for the prompt?
It was already part of the Elasticsearch functionality because we already have a search engine built into Hub that searches all those
Okay,
things.
cool.
Yeah. So one of the things, if we look at the answer, what we're going to do today, we're going to do two things today. We're going to experiment with getting ChatGPT instead of responding with just text-based strings in sort of natural language, we're going to get it to respond in structured JSON responses so that we can do things like know exactly where that URL is. And that's helpful like in a UI or something like that. We'd be able to pull that out and display it separately. So we have a question from a viewer, and thank you for the question. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We're monitoring them today. And the question is, would you use Assistant with file search tool and a vector store built in OpenAI? Yeah, the short answer is yes, you totally can do that. But what we found for this and some other projects is we already had the infrastructure to be able to do that quickly, and we didn't need to do it. But if you don't have that, or you don't have an existing database, then there are tools out there. There's a bunch of different tools out there that can help you along the way. I'm going to break that down now. Thank you. So we're going to get that to respond. So with JSON. So when we first started, when LLMs first started to be a thing, and I'm going to wrap that so we can see it. When LLMs first started to be a thing, they responded in JSON if you asked them to. So
yeah, that was going to be my first thing is can you just tell it to respond in JSON?
yeah, and you totally can. So using only the answer the following question. And if we just put as JSON there, we can see. I just said JSON. As JSON there. And we'll see what it does. So what it did was, so it put answer with the answer, and then it broke out the URL as its own thing.
Okay.
So that's pretty good, actually. But the problem is that, actually, we're gonna change our response here. So that will be a little bit easier to read. So that's pretty good. It provided well-structured JSON that pretty much does what we want. The problem is, and this was especially the case when LLMs first really started to be really usable, it was very inconsistent. And for complex JSON responses, it might like respond with not well-formed JSON. It might be invalid JSON.
Yeah, I was thinking that like whether it would respond with the same structure each time.
Right. So I think if we run this same question over and over again, it's going to respond with the same structure every time. But let's try a different question, like how much time off do I get?
Ooh, okay.
So yeah, so it did answer, and then instead of URL as the attribute the key, it did source.
Yeah.
So it wasn't consistent in that response. So that's exactly what we're going to fix.
Okay.
So there are two things you need to do in order to make sure that it responds with valid JSON and then gives a consistent response. So the first is um, when we make the request to begin with and we send the information, ChatGPT added, um, actually, I need to response format and type JSON object. So that basically is a clue or instruction to ChatGPT, like respond with a valid JSON object. So that was specifically added. I forget what version of GPT it was added, but it was specifically added to really lock down the JSON generation so that it responds with valid JSON.
Cool.
And so it doesn't change what we're getting now because we were getting back valid JSON. It changed again. It changed the source URL. That's great. It's illustrating exactly the problem we need to solve. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell it the format to give us. Answer the following question with the JSON response format. Not now. So we can tell it, we can just write JSON here. So we're going to say answer. Oh, what am I doing? That's not the. And we're basically just giving it an example. And then we can say URL. And the exam and the
don't ask again.
Okay, let's see if that responds the way that we.
Cool.
So that basically fixed the problem that we're giving it. So in a real production system, what you might want to do is instead of writing this by hand or that kind of thing, you can actually do a JSON schema object there or a JSON schema. And then that really locks it down even further because you're basically telling it what's required, what's, so, and for complex objects where that's the case, I recommend that. And then you might do a thing where you have like a method that returns the JSON schema. So you're not including it right here and you're not writing it. You're just calling a method that outputs it into your prompt.
Oh, neat. Okay.
So actually, let's just do that. So let's, we'll call it JSON schema. We won't write a full valid JSON schema, but then we can do a thing where what we're doing here is actually Ruby. And then calling to JSON on it. And then
you have a typo.
Thanks. So that's more like how we would write it, like to clean it up and to make it so that we can have like a full JSON schema object written in something that we know isn't just a big string. Maybe we had a typo or whatever. We can write it in as a Ruby hash and then output it to JSON.
So have we accomplished our task?
We accomplished our task. Um, so, um,
Oh,
I'm not sure. There we go. So yeah, we accomplished our task. So now we're gonna do. Well, actually, do you have any thoughts or questions about that? Anything you'd like to see or try?
um, so do we feel like very confident that it will always return it in the structure that we've provided?
Yes.
Okay.
And the reason why is because of really two things. One is we've told it to do the response format of a JSON object. That's a specific thing that ChatGPT did. The other is that because everyone wants to do this, ChatGPT, OpenAI has made ChatGPT work better.
Very good at it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's it's we can proceed with confidence that it will respond this way.
So would you at all be want to do any kind of error handling for it in case it doesn't? Or I'm just so
Hmm.
I haven't used a lot of this stuff, so I'm
Yeah.
maybe a little bit of a skeptic.
It's all right to be skeptical because it almost seems like magic, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, um, but the we would have error handling in a production system inherent in like the way that we're going to access this. Either we're going to put this answer in an object
Right.
and it will have a answer and a URL. And so we'll get like nil handling and we'll be able to check and call if it's blank and do those kinds of things. We'd handle like we would catch a parsing error, like we would do those things. But those are the things we would do, I think, in any system
Yeah.
where you're responding, where you're getting an external API response in JSON.
Yeah. Okay.
So we don't really need to do anything like above and beyond what we would normally do when talking to APIs.
Cool. I like it. We have a question.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. We can definitely, what I'll do is we'll include this on the event page on thoughtbot.com for this event, but we'll include it in the notes on YouTube as well.
Okay.
Cool. So we have answer and URL coming back. So now what we're going to do is um, there are things that LLMs are good at, and there are things that they're bad at. Um, the two kinds of things that they're bad at that come into play for what we're going to do, like the most often thing is one, they don't have private information. So just like we need to give it the contents of our private repositories in order to respond to a question using that information, there are times where you want the LLM to do something using your information. It just doesn't have it. The other is the way LLMs work is they basically generate text based off of the likelihood that the connections between the words. So it's like they parse basically all the information in the world. And so when you ask it to, this is a gross oversimplification, but when you prompt it, it basically just starts generating an answer. And it's like, what would the next word be based on all of the
Oh,
information in
okay.
the world
Yeah.
and the connections between words? Probably the next word would be this. And it's just like generating.
Like the sequence of words.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So they don't actually think.
Right.
There's no logic inherent in an LLM. So that's why if you ask it to do complex math or something like that, it almost certainly can't do that because it doesn't actually know how to do math. No one taught it how to do math. And so if that answer never appeared, if that question never appeared in the world, it can't probabilistically get to the correct answer because the answer never appeared.
Right.
So that's, again, it's a gross oversimplification, but that's the kind of thing where if you want it to do use information that it doesn't have, like live information, or you want it to do logic, you need to help it. And the way that OpenAI created to help it is that in addition to giving a JSON object as the response format, you can say, my program knows how to do this thing. And you give it a method definition. You say, so the example, we'll go over to the example in the OpenAI document.
So you do have to write some code after all.
You do have to write some code. I'm going to zoom in here. The example that is often used is being able to get the current weather. So there's a new parameter that you can pass into ChatGPT, and you say, here's the tools available to you. I know how, I'm going to tell you about this function that exists. It's called get current weather. Here's what it does, and here are the parameters that it takes. And that's like a JSON schema sort of object. It takes a location, it takes a unit, the possible values are Celsius and Fahrenheit. The location is a string, and it's the city and state.
Like, can this be whatever you want, though?
And it can be whatever you want.
Wow, that's wild.
So what then ChatGPT does is it takes into its context that you know that this method exists. You don't tell it the implementation of the method. You just tell it this method exists, and here's how you call it.
I have another question,
Yeah.
which is there a world where you could write this out in text format and maybe?
Yes,
Okay.
you could. It's just not going to be as consistent. Like OpenAI made this a function of ChatGPT, so because it's parameters and part of the function of the LLM,
Yeah.
it's consistent. If you were to tell it, just write it out, it might not be as consistent.
Okay, cool. That makes sense.
And so what you then do is when you get the responses from ChatGPT, you basically first check, are any of the methods being called in? There's going to be a tool calls
From the response?
from the response.
Oh.
And so you're basically checking the tool calls, and you're saying, did get current weather get called? And if it did, then you execute that function in your application on the Ruby side. And you respond, again, you send it back as a response to ChatGPT. And then you get a second response from ChatGPT using the answer that you gave it from your method. So in this example where it's doing the weather, it responds, it looks like the weather is nice and sunny in San Francisco. If you're planning to go out, it should be a pleasant day. And so that is from the get current weather method.
Cool. Yeah, I know that when you're interacting with it just from like a human interface, you can build up that context. And I didn't realize that you could have your program build up that context and for it to kind of talk to each other in that way.
Yeah. So this is a little bit of in this example, you're only ever expecting one response with function calls, and then you give it back the information, and then you display that to the user. It is possible to build this as a loop and have function calls that then might call more functions based on what it responded with. For very complex systems, you might actually have more of a loop until no functions are being called. That must be the answer to display to the user. But that can get really complicated. But you can see it's possible to do that. Okay, so how is this practical? So in our applications, it's practical for doing things that the LLM doesn't know how to do, like logic, math, um, and and information that only your application has. So in the same way, we could write a function where it can get information from the handbook that ChatGPT could search our handbook when it detects that an answer that it needs might be in the handbook. Instead of us using Elasticsearch to build context to send it to ChatGPT, we could give ChatGPT a function that does that.
Would it try looking in the handbook first and then try calling a method if it can't find it, something like that, or are we already telling it where to, like, what to do?
I think we would, if we were to implement that, we would tell it.
Okay.
So another thing that Hub has is our whole schedule for who's working on what. It also has the skills everyone has. So, I'm a Rails developer, you're a Rails developer. That's in the Hub database. And so Hub knows that, we're both Rails developers, and it knows our schedule. So that's what we're going to do today is we're going to make a function that ChatGPT can call that tells, which people with this skill are available on which days. So that way we could ask ChatGPT, we could give it a project definite. We could say, we have a Rails project starting next week. Who could potentially work on it?
I'm surprised Hub doesn't already do that.
Yeah. It does in a table format.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah. But not in a natural language kind of way.
Cool.
So this is nice because this is a good example too, because it brings up a point that we often have to consider when we're doing integrations with OpenAI, and that is, are we comfortable with the information that we're sending to OpenAI? And one of the things that we're going to hit as we do this is, are we comfortable sending the information that Stephanie Min is a Rails developer
and my schedule
and your schedule,
yeah,
to and potentially names of clients and projects and that kind of thing to OpenAI? Now, if you read the OpenAI terms of service, strictly speaking, that information is private and is deleted after 30 days. I think that's what the terms of service say. And for this particular example, it's not like super private information, right? But it's probably information where you're like, I'm not super comfortable with it. But we could also imagine like a medical system or an EMR, electronic medical record system, where you want to be able to ask these kinds of questions and get answers in the same way, but it is private information that you really don't or can't send to a third party without violating HIPAA or those kinds of things. So we're going to as we implement, we're going to do a strategy. We're going to do a strategy for how you can do this kind of functionality without sending the private information to the LLM. Okay, that was a big preface. Let's jump into the code. So just a disclaimer, we're not going to test drive this because of the time that we have today. And also it's actually really difficult to test drive the response and function calling back and forth with a third-party service when you don't want to actually hit that third-party service. So that's sort of out of scope for this, the thing we're doing today. But I will say, when we're doing this in real systems with code that's going to go, we do test drive it. And we will typically set up, we would typically use a strategy of baking creating a Sinatra fake of the OpenAI service, being able to say, respond in this way with this answer when I ask you this question. And then then you're actually hitting a, a web mock, basically. And that's how we would typically do those complex interactions.
I was just because I was going to ask, have you test driven integrating with OpenAI before?
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of what we were saying earlier is just like really how you would do it with any kind of third party system.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And that's the beauty of this. And I wrote a blog post about it too. Is like, especially, you don't need to be a machine learning expert. You're basically just using APIs and a gem, and we have those skills as Rails developers. That's a big part of what we do all the time. And so it's really empowering to be able to realize that and to be like, oh no, I can do this, and I know how to do it. Okay, so let's so if we go over to Safari, we're basically gonna um, use this as an example. So we're gonna copy this. Uh, oh, I'm sorry. Is it inside the parameters? No, it's outside the parameters. Okay.
No, it's inside the
Oh, yep.
parameters.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay. So we have a function, and we'll call it like um, get stat possible staff. Um, so get the available people with the appropriate skills. Maybe instead of appropriate, let's say matching skills. Okay, so it's going to take a parameter that's an object, and inside that object we have, we'll just do, we'll do one skill for now. So we're really just, replacing but it's good because it gives us an example of the kinds of things we do, because this description we're writing here is a hint to the LLM how to call the method with the right thing. So that's why it's the name of the skill, and then we just say
Cool. I didn't even realize we were going to start this simple. I was like, oh, we could give it a project, but I like starting here.
Yeah. Okay, and then the date. So um, that's a bad malformed sentence, but it'll be good enough. So the skill will be required, but that the date won't be required. And we'll see how that plays out in our implementation.
Okay.
Okay, and then this tool choice here, it defaults to auto. You can, we're setting it to required for this demo so that we're certain that it does call the tool, basically. So that's what that does.
So you could not have it be required and it might be able to figure out something without calling the function.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. Okay, and then we're going to get back a JSON response, and we'll just have it do what it did before. So let's see what it responds with now. Just having the prompt know that this function exists. I actually don't know what this is going to do.
Because the
So
function does not
we didn't
exist
implement
in
it.
the, yeah,
Yeah.
no, okay.
So let's see what it is going to do. So who is available on November? Who is available next week? Who knows Ruby?
Oh,
Okay. So it responded with a 400.
could it be because we said that we required it to call the tool, but uh, we don't, we specify the function name and we
It's
don't have it yet?
it's possible, but I wouldn't have expected that to result in a 400, like an error from the server, because it doesn't know that we don't implement that. So
Could we have just not formatted it
yeah,
correctly?
that's more likely. So I'm wondering, I don't see any
So I did notice one thing,
mhm.
but I don't know if it actually matters. If you scroll down a little bit, um, the type for the skill is the
Mhm.
symbol, where the type for the date is a string. And I actually noticed that, and I was like, oh, maybe we'll just leave it and see what if it can figure it out.
Yeah, let's
Okay, yeah, I
yeah.
would be surprised if that was it.
Yeah. Um let's try change. I don't know if date is
Ooh,
okay.
something new.
Yeah. So no implicit conversion of nil to string. So in when it's trying to parse um the JSON there, I believe.
So it did respond.
Yeah. So
Cool.
let's see what it responded with.
I think, do you, oh, okay. I see.
We're still going to get the error, but before we get the error, we'll see what the response is. So it responded with a call to get possible staff in tool calls with the argument skill Ruby on Rails date next week. So that is working. The reason why we got an error is because there's no we're digging out choices message content, and that was nothing. So we were passing nil to JSON.parse, and that was creating an error.
So is the expected reply structure set up in the context or
This is part of the ChatGPT API. So
okay.
this format is consistent. It's in tool calls and that.
Okay.
So we actually have example code from those docs that do that. So you can see that it digs out the message and it checks if the message is role assistant and it contains tool calls. So we go back here, we can see it contains tool calls and the message role is assistant. So that's what we are expecting.
Okay.
So there's no harm in just copying and pasting this and using it as a template for what we're going to do. Okay.
I think you need to use reply somewhere instead of what the variable was in the snippet.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. It might actually be easier if we just rename this to
Yeah. I think it was function response. Maybe?
response.
Response.
Okay. So the tool call, each tool call has an ID. We can see that here. And so that's that when you, so that you can keep track, and ChatGPT can keep track of what you're responding to. So you give it back the tool call ID so that it knows, oh, you're responding to this method call that I made, and it matches based on those IDs. You also give it the name of the function that was called and what the response is from that function. So we can just place this with get, what do we call it?
Possible staff.
And so decide how to handle the else when it's not any of the things. Okay, and then we respond, and then we get back a second response. It's interesting. The model changed. We have a here up here, but I'm gonna change that to freeze, freeze. Oh,
Oh
oh,
no.
I got vimmed. Okay. Okay. So I'm changing it to GPT-4o just because that's even better. It's the better, newer model. But it actually, for our purposes, probably wouldn't have mattered because what we're doing is so sort of basic. Um, but
And then is there anything else that needs to be set up in the parameters that we did in the first request?
um, no,
Okay.
actually, yes, the response format.
Mm, I guess we can. Maybe we don't know what the response format is
Yeah, let's
for this
let's
new.
leave it and
Yeah.
we'll see.
Okay.
Without that, it's just going to respond as text again. Okay. So then we have the get possible staff, and we just splat the whole function arguments into that method. So let's run. We haven't implemented that method yet, so we should get a no method error or a syntax error because we messed something up. So we're missing. This is the biggest risk when you copy and paste something. Looks like we have two.
Does this if have an end? Oh, this is suspicious.
Mhm. So what this is doing is it's looping through all the tool calls because it's potential that there's multiple tool calls, each with their own ID. So then it's adding that to the messages array.
So that looks fine.
Mm-hmm.
I think you are missing an end around 102.
Around 102. Yeah.
I could be wrong.
Um,
Oh,
that
that
may
looked
have
right.
actually
Yeah.
done it. There we go. So
Nice.
that's exactly what we expected. So now we have to define that get possible staff method. So
This is almost like TDD.
yes, almost. Um, so so we're not gonna so we have the skill and
Date.
date, and date was optional. So um, uh, can we do that? We can do that,
Yeah,
right?
I think so.
Yeah. So it will just default to next week if the date isn't given. So we're not going to fully implement the finding the right people by skill and all that stuff is sort of it's a domain specific thing to this app. We don't need to take like the time to really dig into that, but we'll do it sort of in a cursory way. Um, and what I want to get to is demonstrating how in a Rails app we can obfuscate the private information
Right.
that we don't want to give.
Okay.
So um, if we do skill dot um, um, yeah, I just realized as I was typing that out that the skill in Hub is not called Ruby on Rails. It's called Ruby/Rails development.
Okay.
Um,
Should
so
we could we just hard code that?
yeah, so yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay.
So find by I think that's and I think it's
I think you need a yeah.
I,
Hi.
um
We're live streaming in here. Do you need the space? Okay. Thank you.
um and then we can say people. So let's go over to the skill class just to make sure that it's the skill factory, skill model, um, has many people through abilities. Um, and I think that it has okay. So that's going to give us an array of people. So that's an actual class. Sorry, an actual array of the of people objects which have names and that kind of thing. So what we might do is call map and then name. Um, and then that would be giving an array of the possible staff to ChatGPT, but it would be everyone's names.
Mm-hmm.
So in a Rails app, we have and with active record models, we have something that is better than that, that also accomplishes the point of not giving people's names or other private information, and that is global IDs. So
Oh, interesting.
yeah, so what's the method to uh, I think
I don't
it's
remember.
to so
Ah,
uh, to global ID. Okay. So we do this, then so now we can reload. Uh, so for people who aren't familiar, what a global ID looks like um, is that it's an application name, the model, and then the ID of the object, prefaced by GID.
okay. I was about to ask why this would be better than just the ID, but I see it just has that extra context.
Yeah. So that way you can actually reload. Um, Rails has the ability to load objects based on that GID. So now, if we undefined method messages for um, so we're not doing so we missed this, which is um, in the example code, it sets up an array of messages in the beginning. Um, so we need to do that a little bit differently because we have the um, did we lose our, what I'm looking for is the prompt text that we had before. Oh, oh, there it is. Okay. So here we can just say messages. And then up here. Okay, so that preserves, when you do this kind of thing, you're preserving the whole chat chain.
History, yeah.
Yeah. And that's how it works. Okay. So one of the challenges is OpenAI doesn't give super helpful error messages. Thank you. Thanks for watching. Doesn't give super helpful error messages. So it can be a little bit difficult to figure out exactly what you got wrong. Um, let's remove some sort of variability from this. So the last thing was the get possible staff was called and it was a no method error. So the only thing we did was implement this, right? I'm comfortable having my name on the stream, so I'm gonna. Okay, so and let's see if that also responds with a 400. Okay.
I think it might have been the way we set up messages.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we did change that. You're right. Um, what do you think might be wrong? Let's go over the example again. So we have messages, role, user, content with the prompt.
Could it be where the scope that we defined messages in? Hmm, that looks fine to me, actually.
Messages, tools. Okay, let's see whether it's erroring on this first one or the second one.
Okay.
So let's see if we get back from here. Okay, so we got that function call. So we are there. So then it's erroring on the second one where we're actually returning the possible staff as a message. And so let's respond with just a string instead of an array. Oh, we're responding with a Ruby array. Let's respond with just a string. See if that.
Oh, you're
Okay.
available.
Yeah, and I know Ruby on Rails. Hooray. Okay, so that's interesting to me that it is erroring, and I wonder whether there's
Yeah, I'm curious. Can we see if how we use the response and then send it back to GPT?
what what do you mean? I didn't quite follow.
Uh, I'm I think I was curious because like all we had to do was just change the return type.
Hmm.
So I'm wondering when what do we do with the return value from our get possible staff function? Um,
What we did with it was it's put into function response, and then it's the content
I
there.
see.
So I suspect that if we call to JSON on that, and then put it back as an array, that it's going to fix the problem. Yeah. So it was passing the Ruby array there. It probably wasn't valid as an array or something like that, and was causing the error from ChatGPT. So now that we have that, we should be able to, uh, so we're calling to global ID, and then that array is going to have to JSON called on it. So it should work. There are multiple people available. Okay.
That's true.
I like how it gave a URL to hiring a Rails developer apprentice. That's funny. Okay, there are multiple people. So then let's address that in the prompt. So using answer the following question, the given format and provide the URL. Um, uh, list all people available. Programming with an LLM is so funny because, like, first of all, that's probably going to work. But also, it's so funny that that works. Like, it's a sort of puts it it's like it makes programming fun in a way that, or I find it fun because it's like, is that going to work? I don't know, maybe. Let's see.
I had the thought that it's kind of like asking a kid who's like a little like snarky, you
Mm,
know, and like refusing to actually answer your question.
yeah. So it didn't work. I'm going to try list all individual
So
people available. Yeah.
I'm wondering because we sent the global ID, like how does it then get uh okay, never mind.
Um,
It's coming back with
yeah.
the
So
global ID.
so it's coming back with the global IDs. The interesting thing is that it took them and did something with that information and change it in a way that we're not going to be. We could parse back out, but we
Yeah.
want it to preserve the global IDs.
um the including but not limited to is a funny expression of like I
Yeah.
think it's this people, but
Right.
I will say because we still have that JSON schema
Hmm.
structure that we're saying it to return to. Maybe we want to do something different with that.
Yeah. Well, we could do so one thing we could do is we could build that into our JSON schema. We could say,
An array, maybe?
yeah, an array. Actually, what we want to do is if we give it an example with
Yeah,
a GID,
that's what I was thinking.
um, and it'll be hub person and then ID. So we're basically giving it a big hint about preserving the GUIDs, the global IDs rather. So let's try that and see. Oh, it's really thinking now.
What does that mean if it is slow?
Uh, well, one, it could mean we've messed something up, but it could also mean we'll see if we get a timeout.
Okay.
Um,
Ooh.
nope. Okay. So part of the issue is we
Oh,
didn't we in our staffing method we did everyone who's ever worked at Thoughtbot who knows Rails even at the apprentice level. So we want to change this to active. So it was slow there because we gave it so many people and it then needed to respond with so many people.
that's so funny because of the last response we got where it was just like, here's these three people, but that's not all of them. And it turns
Yeah.
out that there's actually a
Yeah.
lot once
Yeah.
we tell it to give us all of
That's
them.
probably why it was um it was summarizing it because it was so many people probably. So once we made it clear we wanted all the available people. Um, okay. So that should be faster and it should be fewer people. Still going to be a lot, but so now we have an array of the global IDs of the individual people, and so you can so in our response, we're going to parse this as JSON. Um, and So it was a good idea to put it in the array. If you don't have it in an array, you can just basically do a find and replace on the GUIDs, looking up the each GUID. But now we have it in an array, so that's going to make this even easier. Um, so So remember, we're doing this so that we don't pass people's personal information to the LLM. We're passing around obfuscated GUIDs. And we need to then look up the person model again based on that GUID. I actually forget off the top of my head what the
Global ID locator dot
yeah,
locate. Yeah.
there we go. So we're not gonna um, run this because it's going to print a bunch of real people's names on and we're live streaming. But and we just want to be respectful of people's information. I should have like run faker over the people's names or something like that, so they weren't real. Um, but so what we have here is a strategy we can use built into every Rails app to be able to obfuscate any models uh, that we have in our app. And it's really sort of a powerful technique for being able to use third-party LLMs uh, and keep all your private information still in your application and only give the IDs. Um, and I don't know who needs to know this, but I think this is something that people overlook as a thing that is really powerful about Rails, because these conventions of having a global ID and all that stuff make it possible to keep things even more private than you would otherwise.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And just having like firmer boundaries around things that are just for your application to know,
Mm-hmm.
while
Yeah.
still getting the benefits of being able to use LLMs for to like just process the
Mm-hmm.
information that you're giving
Mm-hmm.
it.
And it's really nice that the LLM will preserve the global IDs. Like it won't as long, but you have to tell it to do that, because remember at first it was taking them and it was like, oh, person 336, and it was removing the slashes and the GID and everything. But you can get it to preserve it, particularly by keeping that formatted structured response as JSON, where you can give it the examples of how you want it to respond. And then saying, actually, to tie into the question you were asking at the beginning, it's like, how certain are we that it's going to keep that consistent response? And we can be certain, or within reason, because we were saying we want our response objects as JSON format, and OpenAI has done a lot of tuning to make sure that it responds in JSON with consistent, valid responses. So cool. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it. We accomplished what we were set out to do. And hopefully everyone learned a little something along the way about how to do not only this with OpenAI, but with ChatGPT, and what the tools we have at our disposal with Rails to protect private information.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun. This is cool. Again, this was all new for me, so it was really neat to see, but also how kind of it really wasn't like that much uh, stuff that was unfamiliar as
Mm-hmm.
a Rails developer.
Yeah. So we're at RubyConf in Chicago, and that's why we're together in person doing this, but it was a lot of fun to do it. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Chad.
See y'all later. See you
Bye.
next week.